I'm Luna Rodriguez, 22 years old, and right now I'm hauling catering trays through this brutal downpour. Most people my age are probably somewhere cozy tonight, maybe binge-watching Netflix or hanging out with friends, but here I am getting absolutely soaked while my muscles scream from stocking shelves all morning at the grocery store. These aluminum pans full of lasagna feel like they weigh 1,000 pounds, and I know my brother Adrian is probably at some upscale bar downtown right now, using our parents' platinum card like it's his personal ATM. The way things work in our family has never made any sense to me. He cruises down the freeway while I'm stuck crawling through rush hour traffic. I never imagined this wet, miserable Thursday evening would completely flip everything upside down. Someone from my childhood was about to recognize me at the exact moment I needed it most. Before I walk you through how I went from carrying food trays in the rain to totally transforming my world, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt like the backup singer in your own family's show. Our Florida suburb looked like something straight out of a magazine. Palm trees lined every street, houses had perfect lawns, and everything screamed middle-class success. Our place on Sunset Boulevard had 5 bedrooms, a pool, and all the bells and whistles you'd expect. My dad Carlos managed 3 different restaurant locations, while my mom Isabel ran a successful tutoring business from our converted garage. We weren't living paycheck to paycheck, but we weren't rolling in money either. From the outside, we probably looked like the perfect family. The unfair treatment started creeping in when I was really young. I remember being 8 years old and spending weeks working on a science project about solar energy for the school science fair. I actually took first place in my grade level, but my parents completely missed the award ceremony because Adrian had a basketball tournament. My blue ribbon ended up forgotten in my backpack while Adrian's team photos covered every inch of our refrigerator. "Your brother needs us there cheering him on," Mom would say gently whenever I felt disappointed. "Sports are so competitive for boys now, they need all the support they can get." By the time I turned 13, the pattern was undeniable. Adrian's birthday parties were like mini concerts with DJ setups and elaborate themed decorations. My birthdays barely registered on anyone's radar, maybe pizza delivery if I was really lucky. When I asked why things were so uneven, Dad would squeeze my shoulder and say, "You're so mature for your age, Luna. You understand that not everyone needs all the extra fuss." Their words shaped my reality because I didn't have any alternative. Independence became my survival skill by pure necessity. I started pet sitting and dog walking at 14, hoarding every dollar while Adrian got weekly allowances for doing absolutely nothing. I learned video editing and social media marketing through YouTube tutorials because actual courses cost too much, yet somehow Adrian's football equipment never seemed to strain the family budget. The inequality became impossible to ignore when we both hit 17. For Adrian's birthday, our parents surprised him with a nearly new Ford pickup truck. When my birthday rolled around 7 months later, Dad handed me brochures for community college and applications for part-time jobs. "We want you to learn the value of earning your way," he explained proudly. "You'll have so much more pride in things when you work for them." I spent nearly 3 years working retail and babysitting before I could afford a beat-up Honda with a broken AC and a transmission that slipped constantly. Meanwhile, when Adrian rear-ended someone at a red light, our parents covered his insurance deductible without even asking what happened. College planning revealed the most crushing inequality of all. Through high school, I maintained a 3.8 GPA while working 25 hours a week. I joined every club that didn't conflict with my work schedule and stayed up past midnight studying every single night. My dream was attending Florida State for digital marketing and communications. When acceptance letters arrived, I received decent financial aid, but not enough to cover everything. "We've been setting aside education money for both of you kids," Mom had promised me countless times over the years. But when crunch time came, I discovered my college savings had been invested in Adrian's first business attempt, an online platform for booking personal trainers that collapsed within 6 months. He'd quit community college after 2 semesters to become a tech entrepreneur. "It's a smart investment in his potential," Dad justified. "With your grades and work ethic, student loans won't be a problem. You'll handle it perfectly." I ended up at community college buried under debt while working 40 hours a week. Meanwhile, Adrian bounced from one business idea to another, each one bankrolled by our parents, each one failing because he never committed to actually finishing anything. One family member stayed completely absent from our lives during all this drama. Uncle Roberto, Dad's younger brother. He disappeared when I was 15 after an explosive argument with my father. I remember shouting voices echoing from the backyard, words like enabling and favoritism cutting through the evening air. After that night, his name became completely off limits. Any pictures that included him got quietly removed from our walls. Whenever I asked about his absence, Dad would immediately shut me down. "Some people just bring negativity into your life," he'd say with such ice in his voice that I learned to stop asking. My breaking point hit during Christmas of my sophomore year at community college. I was completely drained from final exams and pulling double shifts at Target to afford spring semester textbooks. During dinner, our parents enthusiastically announced they were funding a downtown office space for Adrian's third startup revival. "This concept is absolutely bulletproof," Adrian declared smugly, completely ignoring how his previous ventures had consumed my education fund. When I quietly mentioned worrying about affording next semester's classes, Mom patted my arm dismissively. "Maybe taking a semester break to build up savings would be wise." I looked around that dinner table, taking in my brother's arrogant grin, my father's admiring gaze focused entirely on his golden boy, my mother's casual dismissal of my financial stress, and something deep inside me finally exploded. I moved out 3 days later. At 19, I found a cramped one-bedroom apartment with a roommate and pledged complete financial independence. I'd rather struggle entirely on my own than continue being treated like an afterthought in my own home. 3 years later, my life had shrunk down to work, sleep, work, repeat, with barely any space to breathe between. My apartment sat in one of those neighborhoods that landlords optimistically call transitional, which really means sirens at all hours and broken streetlights. The building's air conditioning had been under repair since I moved in 10 months ago, so I sweltered through Florida summers with a rattling window unit and 2-floor fans. My alarm buzzed at 5,000 every morning. By 5,045, I was clocking in at Marketplace Foods, where I'd worked for over 2 years. Early morning shifts meant unloading delivery trucks, stocking produce, and setting up displays before customers arrived. The work was repetitive and exhausting, but it provided steady income and decent health insurance. "Girl, you look like you got hit by a hurricane," Jasmine commented one morning as I yawned while organizing the banana display. With her bright pink braids and infectious laugh, Jasmine had become my closest friend since starting at Marketplace. "Hurricane's probably an understatement," I replied, forcing myself to smile. Jasmine knew my entire situation. She'd listen during our 15-minute breaks as I vented about family drama or stressed about money, never judging, always offering her spare bedroom if I needed somewhere to crash. My monthly budget was like solving a complex puzzle with too many pieces. After rent, utilities, student loan payments, car insurance, and groceries devoured their portions, I had exactly a 52 left for everything else. Any surprise expense, car repairs, medical bills, anything unexpected meant choosing between meals or borrowing from my emergency fund, which never seemed to grow past a 400. Marketplace shifts ended at 2,000, giving me just enough time to race home, change clothes, and start my evening catering gig. 4 nights a week, I hauled food and supplies to corporate events, weddings, and private parties until sometimes past midnight, navigating Miami traffic in my dying Honda that now had 185,000 miles and made terrifying grinding sounds when I hit the brakes. The physical exhaustion was becoming impossible to manage. 65-hour work weeks carved permanent shadows under my eyes and triggered constant headaches. My hands stayed perpetually raw and dry from handling cold produce and hot serving trays. I carried industrial hand cream everywhere, applying it in parking lots between jobs, a tiny luxury that kept my skin from literally cracking open. Despite achieving independence, family dynamics continued poisoning my thoughts. Mom's weekly phone calls followed the exact same script every time. She'd spend 15 minutes gushing about Adrian's latest venture, currently his 4th startup attempt, some app for finding local music venues, completely funded by our parents despite his track record of spectacular failures. "He's presenting to angel investors next month," she'd bubble with excitement. Your father truly believes this could be his breakthrough moment. Only after that would she remember to ask about my life, but never with any real curiosity about my answers. When I mentioned my social media freelance projects, she'd respond with hollow encouragement. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Creative hobbies are so important. Weekly family barbecues remained technically open to me, but between exhaustion and resentment, I maybe showed up once every 6 weeks. When I did appear, every conversation revolved around Adrian's business prospects, while my 2 jobs got dismissed as temporary phases, despite supporting me completely for years. 2 months ago, I'd applied for a small business loan to launch my own social media marketing agency. I'd been building a client base through freelance work between shifts, slowly creating a portfolio, dreaming of making it my primary income. The loan officer had reviewed my application with barely hidden skepticism. Your portfolio demonstrates real potential, he'd said carefully, but your current debt situation and limited business credit history make this loan amount unfeasible. I walked out of that bank feeling completely crushed. That same evening, scrolling through Instagram showed photos of Adrian's brand new MacBook Pro, purchased with our parents' credit card. His caption read, "Investing in success, entrepreneur a blessed a grinding." Resentment had been accumulating for so long that some days it felt like carrying around a backpack full of rocks. I kept trying to focus forward, to release the anger, but staying positive proved nearly impossible when the inequality remained so glaring and constant. This past Monday delivered particularly brutal punishment. My car's transmission started slipping during my morning commute. Marketplace's freezer system malfunctioned, creating chaos with spoiled inventory and furious customers. 3 different catering events ended with clients who forgot to include tips despite my 12-hour workday. By evening, I was running purely on energy drinks and stubbornness, every muscle in my body screaming for rest. Then Mom called with her request that nearly broke me completely. "Luna, honey, we need a tiny favor. Adrian's having some cash flow challenges this month with the business. Could you possibly spot him $600 just until his investor presentation next week?" I almost rear-ended the car in front of me. The sheer audacity of asking me, someone who skipped lunch to afford gas, to loan money to my perpetually subsidized brother, shattered something fundamental inside my chest. "Mom, I work 2 jobs and barely make my rent every month," I said, my voice shaking with exhaustion and fury. "I don't have a 600 sitting around." "Well, if you came to family dinners more regularly, you'd understand we've put everything into Adrian's business venture. Money's tight for everyone right now." Her tone carried subtle blame, as if my absence somehow caused their financial decisions. After hanging up, I pulled into a 7-Eleven parking lot and completely lost it. I cried harder than I had in years, not pretty tears, but the kind of sobbing that leaves you gasping and your face swollen. I was hitting my absolute breaking point, unsure how much longer I could sustain this punishing existence. That Thursday evening, the universe seemed determined to test every limit of my endurance. Storm clouds had been building all day, and by 7:30, rain was attacking South Florida with tropical intensity. Catering staff universally dread rain. It means treacherous driving, soaked uniforms, and clients who rarely adjust tips despite the extra difficulty. I had absolutely no idea this miserable, storm-soaked evening would completely revolutionize the trajectory of my entire life. The final delivery address belonged to an exclusive gated community where multi-million-dollar mansions hid behind tropical landscaping and privacy walls. I'd catered events here before. Wealthy clients typically tipped less generously than middle-class customers, despite their obvious financial abundance. This particular estate was lit up like a festival, with what appeared to be a major corporate celebration in full swing. Music and laughter echoed from inside as I struggled to balance 4 aluminum catering trays under my rapidly disintegrating umbrella, my black uniform already soaked through, work shoes squelching with every step across their brick driveway. A 30-something woman in an expensive cocktail dress answered the front door, holding a champagne glass and looking genuinely surprised by my drenched appearance. "Oh my goodness, the catering delivery!" she called over her shoulder to the party crowd. Several voices cheered in response. She turned back to me with a slightly intoxicated smile. "How much is the total?" "$340 for everything," I replied, maintaining my professional voice despite feeling absolutely miserable. She fumbled through her designer purse for what felt like forever, eventually pulling out a credit card. After processing the payment, she handed me $130.50 cash. "Keep the change, honey," she said dismissively. $10 tip for 4 heavy trays in a tropical storm." "Thank you," I managed to say, though my disappointment was impossible to completely hide. As I turned to leave, someone inside the house yelled, "Make sure she doesn't drip all over the marble," which triggered another round of laughter from the party guests. I trudged back toward my car, rain now soaking through my catering cap and streaming down the back of my neck. My windshield wipers were falling apart, creating muddy streaks across the glass instead of clearing my view. Just another perfect ending to another perfect day, I thought bitterly. "Luna? Luna Rodriguez?" The voice came from behind me as I reached for my car door handle. I turned around, squinting through the downpour at a tall figure standing under the protection of a large black umbrella. He stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step backward. "It's me," the man said, moving into the glow of a decorative pathway light. "Your Uncle Roberto." I froze completely, staring at the face I hadn't seen in 7 years. He looked older, obviously, with gray streaking through his dark hair and new lines around his eyes, but unmistakably my father's brother. The family resemblance was striking, the same strong jawline and prominent nose, though Roberto's eyes held a warmth that I rarely saw in my father's expression. "Uncle Roberto," I finally managed, suddenly aware of how ridiculous I must look standing in the rain, completely soaked in my catering uniform with prestige events embroidered across the chest. "What are you doing here?" he asked, genuine confusion evident in his voice. He stepped forward, extending his umbrella to cover both of us. "You're working catering?" The concern in his voice almost completely undid my composure. It had been so long since anyone in my family had shown genuine interest in my welfare or circumstances. Yes. "It's my second job," I stammered, suddenly self-conscious about my entire situation. "What are you doing here?" I asked in return. "My consulting firm is sponsoring this networking event," he explained, gesturing toward the mansion. "I stepped outside for some fresh air when I saw you walking up with the food trays. I almost didn't believe it was really you." An awkward silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of rain hitting his umbrella. 7 years of family secrets and unspoken questions hung heavy in the humid air. "You're completely soaked," he finally observed. "What time does your shift end?" I glanced at my phone. This was actually my last delivery, so technically right now. "Would you consider grabbing coffee with me?" he asked carefully. "There's a 24-hour diner about 15 minutes from here. I'd really love to catch up." My immediate instinct was to decline. Whatever had happened between him and my father was serious enough to completely sever all family ties. But something in his expression, genuine concern mixed with curiosity, made me hesitate. "I'm not sure that's such a good idea," I said cautiously. "Dad doesn't exactly speak positively about you." A flash of pain crossed his features. "I'm sure he doesn't. But Luna, I'm not asking to use you to get to your father. I'm honestly shocked to see my accomplished niece working catering deliveries in a thunderstorm at 11 p.m. The word accomplished hit me like a physical blow. Is that how he remembered me? The straight-A student with big dreams and ambitious plans? "Things change," I said simply. "They certainly do," he agreed quietly. "1 hour, just coffee, then if you never want to see me again, I'll completely understand." My common sense warred with curiosity and a desperate hunger for connection with someone who remembered me before I became invisible in my own family. Plus, the prospect of sitting somewhere warm and dry was absolutely irresistible. 1 hour, I agreed finally. "Let me call my roommate first." 45 minutes later, I sat across from Roberto in a red vinyl booth at the Sunset Diner, my hair still damp, but my uniform covered by a dry jacket he'd had in his car. A mug of hot chocolate warmed my hands as I studied my long-lost uncle. Roberto hadn't just aged in the past 7 years, he'd completely transformed. The somewhat scattered, perpetually stressed man from my childhood memories had been replaced by someone confident and composed. His suit was expensive but not flashy, his watch similarly high quality but understated. "So," he began, after giving me time to settle in, "tell me what's happened since I saw you last. Last I knew, you were planning to study communications at Florida State." The simple question opened up a floodgate. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the bizarre circumstances, or just the genuine interest in his expression, but I found myself telling him absolutely everything. The college fund that vanished into Adrian's failed ventures, crushing student loans, the 2 jobs, the social media dreams perpetually on hold. Roberto listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly troubled as my story unfolded. When I finally ran out of words, he sat back, absently rotating his coffee mug in his hands. "Your father and I had a very similar childhood," he said after a thoughtful pause. "Our parents played favorites too, except I was the Adrian in that scenario." This revelation completely surprised me. "You were the favorite?" He nodded. "Golden boy, star athlete, could do absolutely no wrong. Your father was the responsible one who never received the same recognition or support." A sad smile crossed his face. "Ironic that he's repeating the exact same pattern, isn't it?" "So what happened between you two?" I asked, the question that had lingered for years finally finding its voice. Roberto sighed deeply. "We started a consulting business together right after college, business strategy and development, before that field was trendy. Your father wanted to take certain shortcuts, make deals that weren't entirely ethical. I disagreed strongly. Things got very ugly very quickly. I bought him out, and the company eventually succeeded beyond anything we'd originally imagined." He paused, meeting my eyes. "He's never forgiven me for being right." The revelation hung between us, contradicting everything I'd assumed about their falling out over the years. "What's the company?" I asked, though I was starting to suspect. "Ever heard of Rodriguez Strategic Solutions?" My jaw dropped. Rodriguez Strategic was a major player in business consulting, regularly making headlines for helping startups scale successfully. "That's yours?" I asked, amazed. He nodded modestly. "Among other ventures now, so yes, you could say I'm comfortable." He paused, studying my face carefully. "Which brings me to why I'm really troubled by seeing you like this, Luna. You have talent. I remember your creativity and drive from when you were a teenager. You shouldn't be working catering deliveries at midnight." My pride flared instantly. "I don't want charity." "Good," he replied without missing a beat. "I don't offer charity, but I do believe in investing in genuine talent." He pulled a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table toward me. "We have a digital marketing department. They're constantly looking for fresh perspectives and innovative approaches. If you're interested, I can arrange an interview." I stared at the card, suspicion and hope battling within me. "Because I'm your niece?" "Because from what I remember, you're brilliant, and from what you've told me tonight, you're also tenacious, responsible, and hardworking," he replied. His expression softened slightly. "The family connection might get you an interview, Luna, but it absolutely won't keep you the job if you can't perform at the level we require." I picked up the card, turning it over in my fingers. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask," he said, glancing at his watch. "It's been more than an hour. I should let you get home and rest." As we walked to our cars, Roberto stopped me with a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Luna, whatever you decide about the job opportunity, please know you can call me anytime. 7 years is far too long to lose touch with family." For the first time that night, tears threatened to spill over. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and watched as he drove away in a modest sedan that nonetheless probably cost more than I'd earn in 5 years. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine, the business card clutched in my hand like a lifeline. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to reject anything connected to the family that had rejected me. But another part, the part that was bone-tired from fighting alone for so long, whispered that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes accepting help isn't the same as giving up. That night, I slept better than I had in months, the business card sitting on my nightstand, catching the first rays of dawn sunlight. 4 days passed before I worked up the courage to call the number on Roberto's card. During those days, I researched everything I could about Rodriguez Strategic Solutions, learning about their innovative consulting approaches, their impressive client list, and their reputation for maintaining positive work culture. Most importantly, I studied their marketing work, the sophisticated campaigns, the thoughtful branding, the attention to audience engagement. Their standards were exceptionally high. When I finally made the call, Roberto's assistant connected me immediately. "I was hoping I'd hear from you," he said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" "Yes," I replied, my fingers nervously twisting the phone cord. "I'm interested in the interview, but I have some conditions. I'm listening." "If I get this opportunity, it has to be because I deserve it professionally. No special treatment, no shortcuts, no nepotism. I need to know I earned it." There was a pause. Then Roberto chuckled softly. "You really are nothing like your brother." Before I could respond, he continued, "How about this? Come to our downtown office tomorrow at 2000 p.m. Bring your portfolio. You'll interview with Marcus Chen, our marketing director. He doesn't suffer fools or play favorites. He'll give you a completely honest assessment." He knows I'm your niece? He will, because transparency matters, but trust me, that fact will work against you rather than for you with Marcus. He'll scrutinize you more carefully to ensure there's no favoritism involved. That wasn't entirely comforting, but it was exactly what I'd asked for. Rodriguez Strategic's headquarters occupied 12 floors of a gleaming downtown Miami office tower. The lobby featured sleek furnishings, living green walls, and a subtle logo etched into frosted glass panels. It screams success without being ostentatious, much like Roberto himself, I realized. The receptionist directed me to the 18th floor, where Roberto met me personally. He looked completely at home in this environment of quiet prosperity, greeting several employees by name as he led me through an open office space filled with natural light and collaborative workstations. "Marcus is waiting in the conference room," he said, stopping at a glass-walled meeting space where a man with silver hair and rectangular glasses studied something on his tablet. "Remember, he doesn't know you're interviewing yet. This is just an informational meeting about our marketing needs and your portfolio." The distinction seemed meaningful to him, so I nodded, clutching my portfolio case like armor. Marcus Chen was intimidating in the way only truly confident people can be. He assessed me with a quick glance as I entered, his expression revealing absolutely nothing. "So you're Carlos's daughter?" he said after introductions, referencing my father without warmth or animosity, just fact. "Yes, but I'm here based on my own abilities," I replied, perhaps too defensively. One eyebrow arched slightly. "We'll see." He turned to Roberto. "I'll take it from here." Roberto nodded and left us alone. For the next 90 minutes, Marcus methodically went through my portfolio, asking pointed questions about my process, my influences, and my technical skills. He made no attempt to be encouraging or friendly, but his questions were insightful and challenging in ways that pushed me to articulate my marketing philosophy more clearly than I ever had before. "Your analytics interpretation needs work," he said bluntly, pointing to a campaign analysis I'd created for a local restaurant. "But your audience targeting is strong and you have excellent instincts for engagement timing." He tapped a social media strategy I'd developed for a small fitness studio. "This piece shows real promise." By the end of the meeting, my nerves had given way to a strange sense of exhilaration. Marcus's critique was the most professional feedback I'd ever received, free from the condescension or dismissiveness I'd grown accustomed to. "We have an internship program," he said finally, closing my portfolio. "It's paid, but not extravagantly. 3 months with potential for permanent position afterward. You'd be working directly with our marketing team on real client projects, not getting coffee or making copy." He fixed me with a penetrating stare. "Roberto wants me to hire you outright, but I don't operate that way, regardless of family connections." "I wouldn't want you to," I assured him. "Good. The internship starts next Monday, 9 to 5, business casual. Can you manage that with your other jobs?" My heart raced. This was actually happening. "I'll make it work." "Excellent." He handed me a folder with paperwork. "Fill these out before you leave today." "And Luna?" His expression softened marginally. "Your work shows genuine talent, but it needs discipline and professional mentorship. That's what we offer here. Whether you succeed or not is entirely up to you." Walking out of that meeting felt like floating. For the first time in years, someone was giving me an opportunity based on potential they actually saw in me, not obligation or charity. Roberto was waiting near the elevator, trying and failing to look casual. "Well?" he asked. "I start Monday," I said, unable to suppress a huge smile. "As an intern." He grinned broadly. "Marcus doesn't believe in shortcuts. That's actually a very good sign." His expression grew more serious. "Will you be able to manage with your other jobs?" Reality crashed back into focus. The internship hours would conflict directly with my grocery store shifts, and while it was paid, the starting stipend wouldn't replace both my current incomes. "I'll figure it out," I said, already calculating numbers in my head that didn't quite add up. That afternoon, I had difficult conversations with both my employers. The grocery store manager, understanding my situation, offered to keep me on for weekend shifts only. "You're too valuable to lose completely," she said kindly, "and this opportunity sounds perfect for your career goals." Quitting the catering job was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in years, my evenings would be my own, but my financial cushion would be razor thin until the internship potentially converted to a full-time position. The first few weeks at Rodriguez Strategic were a whirlwind of learning and adjustment. I quickly discovered that while my technical skills were reasonably strong, my professional experience was seriously lacking. Marcus assigned me to shadow different team members, absorbing their workflows and processes while contributing to small aspects of ongoing campaigns. Imposter syndrome hit hard during those initial days. Everyone seemed so confident, so knowledgeable, while I felt like I was constantly playing catch-up. I stayed late most evenings, practicing techniques I'd observed during the day and studying industry standards online. "Dedication is admirable," Marcus commented one night, finding me still at my workstation at 9,030, "but burnout is real. Pace yourself." Despite his brisk manner, Marcus proved to be an incredible mentor. He never sugar-coated criticism, but he also acknowledged improvement with the same straightforward honesty. Under his guidance, my skills developed rapidly, my confidence growing alongside my competence. Roberto maintained careful professional distance at the office, treating me like any other intern, but occasionally he'd stop by my desk with a coffee and quiet words of encouragement, or send articles related to marketing trends he thought might interest me. His subtle support meant more than I could express. When I received my first real assignment creating a social media campaign for a product launch, the satisfaction of seeing my work published under the Rodriguez Strategic brand was indescribable. For the first time, I felt like my creativity had real value in the professional world. My first internship paycheck, while modest, covered my rent without the desperate juggling act of previous months. By the second month, I was able to move to a slightly better apartment, one where the air conditioning actually worked and the hot water didn't mysteriously disappear on weekends. When I called my parents to share my news about the internship, their reaction was predictably underwhelming. "An internship at your age?" my mother questioned. "Shouldn't you be in a real job by now?" "It is a real job, Mom, with a respected consulting firm." "Roberto's company," my father interjected, his voice immediately cooling. "So that's his angle, using you to get back at me." "This isn't about you, Dad," I replied, frustration mounting. "This is about me finally having an opportunity to use my skills professionally." "Just be careful," he warned. "Roberto always has ulterior motives. Even Adrian couldn't resist taking a shot when he heard about my new position." "Must be nice having connections," he commented during a rare family dinner I attended. "Some of us have to make it on our own merits." The irony was so thick I nearly choked on my arroz con palo, but I held my tongue. Their perception didn't matter anymore. For the first time in my adult life, I was on a path of my own making, surrounded by people who valued what I brought to the table. 3 months into my internship, I barely recognized my professional self. Under Marcus's meticulous guidance and Roberto's occasional strategic advice, my marketing skills had transformed completely. I no longer created merely attractive visuals. I crafted strategic communications that served specific business goals while maintaining aesthetic integrity. My responsibilities had gradually increased, from supporting others' projects to leading small initiatives of my own. My weekend grocery store shifts continued, partly for financial security but increasingly because I enjoyed the change of pace and connection with regular customers. "You seem different," Jasmine commented one Saturday morning as we prepared for store opening. "More confident, I guess? Like you finally know where you're heading." I considered her observation while restocking the produce display. "I feel different, like I'm finally moving forward instead of just surviving day to day." Roberto had become a significant presence in my life, our professional relationship evolving into genuine mentorship. He never criticized my parents directly, but offered perspectives that helped me understand our family dynamics through a different lens. "Success isn't just about talent," he told me during one of our occasional lunch meetings. "It's about opportunity and support. Some people get those handed to them. Others have to fight for every scrap. The fighting makes you stronger, but it shouldn't have to be that hard." My improved financial situation allowed me to move into a one-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood. Nothing luxurious, but clean and well-maintained, with actual natural light and neighbors who didn't have screaming arguments at 3 a.m. The first night I slept there, the quiet was so profound I actually woke up disoriented by the lack of ambient noise. My first real paycheck that covered all my bills comfortably arrived on a Tuesday. I remember staring at my bank account balance, refreshing the screen several times to confirm the number was real. After paying rent, utilities, and my student loan payment, I still had money left over, not just survival money, but actual discretionary income. I celebrated by buying fresh flowers for my apartment and a new professional outfit that wasn't from a thrift store. The growing distance from my family's toxicity helped me see their behavior more clearly. I began setting boundaries, limiting calls with my mother to once weekly and declining dinner invitations when I needed time for myself. This newfound assertiveness didn't go unnoticed. "You never have time for family anymore," my mother complained during one of our calls. "Success is changing you." "I'm the same person, Mom. I'm just not available on demand anymore." The real conflict erupted when Adrian's latest business venture began showing serious signs of trouble. His music venue app had launched with my parents' financial backing, but user adoption was abysmal after the first month's novelty wore off. One evening, my phone rang with my father's number, an unusual occurrence that immediately put me on alert. "Luna," he began without preamble, "your brother needs some temporary assistance. His business is having cash flow issues." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied carefully. "We thought, since you're doing well now with this internship, you might be able to loan him a few thousand to tide him over." The request was so absurd, I initially thought I'd misheard. "A few thousand, Dad? I just started making a stable income 3 months ago." "Family helps family," he pressed. "You know we'd do the same for you." A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. "Would you? Because I don't recall any offers of help when I was working 2 jobs just to survive." "That was different. You chose that path." "I didn't choose to have my college fund given to Adrian. I didn't choose to be the only one expected to stand on my own while he got endless bailouts." My father's voice hardened. "This attitude, this is Roberto's influence, isn't it? He's always been jealous of family loyalty." The accusation ignited something within me. "This has nothing to do with Uncle Roberto. This is about years of different standards for Adrian and me." "You're being selfish, Luna, after everything we've done for you." That was the breaking point. Years of suppressed feelings erupted like a volcano. "What exactly have you done for me, Dad? Name one thing you've sacrificed for my benefit the way you consistently sacrifice for Adrian." His silence was damning. "Thought so," I said quietly. "I won't be loaning money to Adrian. I'm still recovering from years of financial struggle that neither of you ever acknowledged." The conversation ended with my father's cold disappointment, a familiar weight I was finally ready to shrug off. The following Sunday, against my better judgment, I attended family dinner, partly to demonstrate I wasn't afraid of confrontation and partly hoping for some reconciliation. It was a mistake. The tension was palpable from the moment I arrived. My mother's usual effusive greeting was replaced with cool politeness. My father barely acknowledged me. Adrian sat smugly at his usual place, clearly having been informed of my selfishness. Dinner proceeded with stilted conversation until my mother mentioned Roberto. "I hear his company is doing very well," she said with forced casualness. "Expanded into 3 new markets this year." "Yes," I replied, sensing the trap but unwilling to lie. "The growth has been impressive." My father's fork clattered against his plate. "I suppose he's filled your head with his version of our history?" "He's barely mentioned it, actually. Unlike you, he doesn't seem interested in nursing old grudges." "You have no idea what you're talking about," my father snapped. "Roberto betrayed me. He stole my ideas, pushed me out of our company, and then had the nerve to succeed with my concepts." "That's not how he tells it," I replied evenly. "Of course not. He's always been manipulative, and now he's using you to get back at me." I set down my utensils, suddenly tired of the whole charade. "Dad, did it ever occur to you that he hired me because I'm qualified? That not everything revolves around your feud? You wouldn't even know him if not for me," my father retorted. "True, just like I wouldn't know what it feels like to be constantly overlooked in favor of my brother if not for you." The room fell silent. My mother's eyes widened in shock. Adrian shifted uncomfortably, and my father's face flushed dark red. "Is that really how you feel?" my mother asked quietly. "How could I feel any other way? Look at this situation objectively. Adrian fails repeatedly with your financial support. I work myself to exhaustion without asking for help, finally get an opportunity through my own merit, and the first thing you do is ask me to give my hard-earned money to bail him out again." "We've always treated you both equally," my father insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Dad, you know that's not true. You've never even tried to hide the favoritism." Adrian finally spoke up, his voice defensive. "It's not my fault they helped me more. No, it's not your fault, I agreed, surprising him. It's their choice. But it is your responsibility to recognize the privilege and stop taking it for granted. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. As I prepared to leave, my father stopped me at the door. "Roberto destroyed our family business," he said, his voice low and intense. "He'll do the same to you when it suits him." I studied my father's face, seeing for the first time the insecurity behind his anger. "I'm sorry you believe that, but I'm not going to let your grudge determine my relationships." Doctoring home that night, I felt strangely lighter despite the conflict. Speaking my truth after years of silence was terrifying but necessary. The next day, I called Roberto and asked if we could meet outside of work. Over coffee at a quiet cafe, I asked him directly about the conflict with my father. "I've only heard his side," I explained. "I'd like to hear yours." Roberto sighed deeply, running a hand through his graying hair. "Your father and I had different visions for the company we started. He wanted quick profit, even if it meant cutting ethical corners. I wanted sustainable growth built on solid values." He looked at me directly. The breaking point came when I discovered he was altering financial reports to attract investors. When I confronted him, he claimed it was just creative accounting. "I couldn't be part of that." "So you bought him out." "I gave him the chance to buy me out first, actually. When he couldn't raise the capital, I leveraged everything I had to purchase his share. He took the money but never forgave me for the perceived betrayal." His expression softened. "Carlos has always struggled with accepting responsibility for his choices. It's easier to blame others." The parallel to my father's relationship with Adrian was striking, a pattern of enabling, of excusing, of avoiding hard truth. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "It helps make sense of a lot of things." As I returned to work that week, an exciting opportunity arose. Marcus approached me about leading a major project for an important client, a complete digital marketing overhaul for a regional healthcare provider. "It's beyond your current role," he admitted, "but I've seen enough of your work to believe you're ready for the challenge. With proper supervision." The responsibility terrified and thrilled me simultaneously. This was no small assignment. It would be highly visible within the company and could define my professional trajectory. For the first time in my life, self-doubt threatened to overwhelm a golden opportunity. What if I failed? What if I proved my father right about Roberto's judgment? What if I wasn't actually talented, just lucky? Late one evening, as I stared at initial concept sketches that refused to coalesce into something meaningful, Roberto found me in the empty office. "Creative block?" he asked, settling into a chair beside my desk. I nodded miserably. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this project." "You are," he said simply. "Marcus doesn't make recommendations lightly. He sees what you're capable of, even when you don't. But what if I fail? Then you learn and do better next time." His smile was gentle. "Failure isn't fatal, Luna. It's just information." That perspective, so different from my father's perfectionism, gave me permission to take risks with my design approach. The next morning, I started fresh, approaching the healthcare marketing from a patient-centered perspective that ultimately resonated deeply with the client. The project became a turning point in my professional development, pushing me to synthesize everything I'd learned while finding my unique voice as a marketer. With Roberto's strategic guidance and Marcus's technical mentorship, I navigated the complex project successfully, earning praise from the client and recognition within the company. More importantly, I proved to myself that I belonged in this world of creative professionals, not as Roberto's niece or Carlos's daughter, but as Luna Rodriguez, marketer in her own right. 6 months into my time at Rodriguez Strategic, the healthcare marketing project's success led to Marcus calling me into his office for an unexpected meeting. Roberto was there too, his expression carefully neutral. "The internship period ended 2 months ago," Marcus began without preamble. "We've kept you in that status while evaluating your performance." My stomach tightened. Despite positive feedback, the corporate world had taught me to expect the worst. "After reviewing your contributions, particularly on the healthcare project," he continued, sliding a folder across his desk, "we'd like to offer you a full-time position as a junior marketing specialist. This includes a significant salary increase, full benefits, and a clear advancement path." The folder contained an offer letter with a salary figure that made me blink twice to ensure I wasn't misreading. It was more than triple what I'd made at both my previous jobs combined. "Take the weekend to consider it," Roberto added. "This isn't about family, Luna. This is about the value you bring to our team. That evening, I celebrated with a small splurge dinner at an actual restaurant rather than takeout eaten over my laptop. I chose a new place downtown that had opened to excellent reviews, treating myself to a proper meal with appetizer and dessert, reveling in this milestone achievement. As I was finishing my flan, a familiar voice called my name. I looked up to see Adrian approaching my table, accompanied by a woman I didn't recognize. "Thought that was you," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Mind if we join you for a minute?" Before I could respond, they were sitting down. The woman, introduced as Carmen, his new girlfriend, excused herself to the restroom almost immediately, leaving us alone. "Celebrating something?" Adrian asked, eyeing my dessert and glass of wine. "Job offer," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Full-time position at Rodriguez Strategic." "Good for you," he said, though his expression tightened slightly. He glanced around to ensure Carmen wasn't returning yet, then leaned forward. "Look, I didn't want to do this here, but since I ran into you, things are good, Luna." The childhood nickname he hadn't used in years immediately put me on alert. Adrian only reverted to it when he wanted something. "What things?" "The business tanked completely," he admitted, his voice low. "The investors pulled out last week." "Mom and Dad," he trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "They're in serious trouble, Luna. They put everything into this venture. Second mortgage on the house, cashed out retirement accounts, everything." The news hit like a physical blow. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that they might lose the house within months." His eyes met mine, pleading. "They won't tell you because they're too proud, especially after that fight at dinner. But I thought you should know." After Adrian and Carmen left, I sat stunned, dessert forgotten. My parents had always been financially comfortable. The idea of them facing ruin was inconceivable. Despite our strained relationship, the thought of them losing their home of 30 years was deeply troubling. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. The changes were subtle but telling. The normally immaculate lawn needed mowing, the flower beds were untended, and my father's prized car was missing from the driveway. My mother answered the door in a faded house dress, her hair pulled back carelessly, a stark contrast to her usually meticulous appearance. Her surprise at seeing me quickly shifted to nervous energy as she ushered me inside. "This is unexpected," she said hurriedly, clearing magazines from the coffee table. "Your father's just run to the store. Would you like some tea?" The house's interior revealed more signs of strain. The thermostat was set unusually low, mail was piled unopened on the entry table, and a water stain on the ceiling suggested a leak no one had addressed. "Mom," I said gently, stopping her nervous tidying. "I saw Adrian last night. He told me what's happening." Her movements stilled for a moment. She seemed about to deny everything, then her shoulders slumped in defeat. "We didn't want you to know," she whispered. "Why not? Pride, I suppose." She sank onto the sofa. "After how we treated you, asking for help seemed unthinkable." As she spoke, the full extent of their financial disaster emerged. My father's company had downsized months ago, reducing his salary by 30%. Rather than adjusting their lifestyle, they'd maintained appearances while drawing down savings. Then came Adrian's business, their sure-thing investment that would solve everything. "We believed in him," my mother said, tears forming, "just like we always have. Carlos put in our retirement savings first. When that wasn't enough, we took a second mortgage." "How much did you invest total?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Almost a 450,000, she whispered. The figure was staggering. "And it's all gone?" She nodded miserably. "The company collapsed completely. There's nothing to salvage." My father returned home during this conversation, his expression hardening when he saw me. "Adrian had no right to tell you," he said, setting down grocery bags that I noticed contained only store-brand basics, another sign of their new reality. "I'm your daughter," I replied. "I had every right to know." "So you could gloat? Tell us I told you so about Adrian?" "No," I said firmly, "so I could help if possible." His laugh was bitter. "Help? What could you possibly do about this?" "Carlos," my mother interjected sharply, "that's enough." Something in her tone, a newfound steel I'd never heard directed at him before, made my father fall silent. He sat heavily in his armchair, suddenly looking every one of his 64 years. "I've enabled this situation for too long," my mother continued, surprising both of us. "The way we've treated Luna compared to Adrian, the financial decisions, all of it. I've gone along with everything, and look where it's gotten us." "Isabel," my father began, but she cut him off. "No, Carlos, it's time for honesty." She turned to me, her eyes red but clear. When you were born, your father was so certain you'd be another boy. He'd already planned fishing trips and baseball games. When the nurse said it's a girl, I saw his disappointment. I've spent 22 years trying to compensate for that moment, letting him favor Adrian to make up for it. That was wrong. My father stared at her, shock evident on his face. That's not true. I never. It is true, she insisted. You may not have realized it, but I did. And I allowed it because it was easier than confronting you. She reached for my hand. I'm sorry, Luna. We failed you. The raw honesty of her confession left me speechless. For years, I'd assumed my mother was simply following my father's lead in favoring Adrian. The revelation that she had recognized the injustice all along, but chosen to enable it, added a new layer of complexity to my childhood memories. There's something else you should know, my mother continued after a moment, about Roberto and your father. My father stood abruptly. Isabel, don't! She deserves the truth, Carlos. My mother's gaze remained steady. Roberto tried to warn us about investing in Adrian's ventures years ago. When you were in college and we used your fund for Adrian's first business, Roberto came to us after he found out. He offered to replace your college fund himself. What? I turned to my father in disbelief. We refused, my mother continued. Your father saw it as charity, as Roberto showing off his success. She sighed deeply. The fight they had, Roberto said, we were repeating the patterns from their childhood, creating another generation of inequality. Your father threw him out of the house, told him never to contact us again. The revelation stunned me into silence. All these years, I'd imagined their feud centered entirely on business disagreements. The truth that Roberto had tried to intervene on my behalf shifted my understanding of everything. Is that true? I finally asked my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He had no right to interfere in how we raised our children. He was trying to help me, I said, the realization dawning slowly. And you rejected it because of your pride. The three of us sat in heavy silence, years of family dynamics suddenly exposed in harsh light. My father's resentment toward his more successful brother, my mother's silent complicity, the pattern of favoritism that had shaped my entire life. I need some air, I said finally, rising from the couch. Outside on the porch, I called Roberto. Can we meet? There's something important we need to discuss. That evening, at a quiet park near the river, I told Roberto everything: my parents' financial disaster, my mother's confessions, the revelation about his offer years ago. Why didn't you tell me you tried to replace my college fund? I asked. He sighed, watching the sunset reflect on the water. What purpose would it have served? It would have seemed like I was trying to turn you against your father. But all these years, I thought you thought I'd abandoned you too. His eyes were sad when they met mine. I'm sorry for that. After your father cut contact, I tried reaching out to you directly a few times, but the messages were never returned. I assumed you wanted nothing to do with me either. I never received any messages, I said, the puzzle pieces finally fitting together. Roberto nodded thoughtfully. Your father and I, our relationship has always been complicated. He resented me for being our parents' favorite, then resented me more for succeeding after he chose to leave our company. He turned to face me fully. But Luna, despite everything, he's still my brother, and he's still your father. A father who chose his pride over my education, I pointed out bitterly. Yes, Roberto acknowledged. But also a man trapped in patterns he learned from his own father. That doesn't excuse his behavior, but it might help explain it. We sat in contemplative silence as darkness fell around us. Finally, I asked the question that had been forming since learning the extent of my parents' situation. What would you do if you were me? Roberto considered this carefully. I'd probably help them, but with conditions. Breaking destructive patterns requires more than financial rescue. It requires fundamental change. He paused. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. This is your decision, not mine. The conversation with Roberto provided the clarity I desperately needed. Over the next few days, I developed a plan not just to address my parents' immediate crisis, but to help heal our family's deeper dysfunctions. 6 months after discovering my parents' financial crisis, I stood in my new office at Rodriguez Strategic, arranging family photos on the credenza behind my desk. The glass-framed promotion certificate to senior marketing specialist still felt surreal, especially considering my journey from carrying catering trays in the rain just a year earlier. My career had flourished beyond my most ambitious dreams. The healthcare marketing project had won an industry award, establishing my reputation within the company. More importantly, I'd developed confidence in my abilities that no external validation could provide. Marcus still pushed me relentlessly, but now as a respected colleague rather than a tentative intern. My personal transformation had been equally profound. The exhausted, resentful young woman carrying food trays in the rain had become someone who faced challenges directly, set healthy boundaries, and recognized her own worth independent of family validation. After careful consideration, I had decided to help my parents, but on terms that required real change rather than enabling continued dysfunction. The first step was arranging a meeting with a financial advisor specializing in retirement crisis management. I paid for the consultation as a non-negotiable condition of my assistance. The advisor's assessment was sobering, but not hopeless. With significant lifestyle adjustments and a structured repayment plan, my parents could avoid losing their house, though their retirement would be delayed by several years. I contributed a portion of my savings towards stabilizing their immediate situation, structured as a formal loan with documented terms rather than an open-ended bailout. My most controversial condition: Adrian had to get a real job and contribute to the family's recovery. No more entrepreneurial ventures funded by parents who couldn't afford it. No more living rent-free while pursuing the next big idea. "That's unfair," Adrian had protested when I presented these terms during a tense family meeting. "You're punishing me for trying to build something." "I'm not punishing you," I replied calmly. "I'm asking you to take responsibility for your part in this situation. You accepted money you knew they couldn't afford to give." It took 3 weeks of sulking before Adrian finally accepted reality, taking an entry-level position at a marketing firm. The regular paycheck and structured environment were initially foreign concepts to him, but gradually, something unexpected happened. He began to take pride in earning his way. The most difficult aspect of my plan was the requirement for family therapy. My father initially refused outright, viewing it as an admission of failure. "We're doing this, Carlos," my mother said with newfound firmness. "If not for us, then for our children. We've damaged them both in different ways." Those weekly sessions became the foundation for healing decades of dysfunction. Under the guidance of Dr. Fernandez, a family therapist specializing in adult parent-child relationships, we slowly began unpacking the complex dynamics that had shaped our family. My father's journey was particularly challenging. Acknowledging his favoritism meant confronting his own childhood wounds. The constant comparison to Roberto, the feeling of never measuring up to his older brother. "I didn't want Adrian to feel what I felt growing up," he admitted during one particularly raw session, "but instead, I made Luna feel exactly that way." That admission, the first time he'd acknowledged the pattern, directly marked a turning point. Progress wasn't linear, with setbacks and difficult conversations along the way, but the trajectory moved steadily toward greater understanding. My mother worked diligently to rebuild our relationship, making efforts that ranged from small gestures like calling just to check on me without mentioning Adrian, to larger acknowledgments of how her passivity had enabled the unequal treatment. "I failed you by not speaking up," she told me during a private lunch. "I can't change the past, but I can promise to do better now." Adrian's growth was perhaps the most surprising. Removed from the cushion of parental bailouts, he struggled initially with the expectations of regular employment. There were missed deadlines, conflicts with supervisors, and late-night calls bemoaning the unfairness of it all. But slowly, incrementally, he began developing skills he'd never needed before: perseverance, accountability, delayed gratification. 6 months into his job, he was promoted to junior account manager based on genuine merit. The pride in his accomplishment was qualitatively different from his previous hollow bravado. "It's weird," he confessed during one of our newly established monthly sibling dinners, "but earning something feels better somehow, even though it's smaller than what I was aiming for with the business." Roberto's gradual reconciliation with my father represented another healing dimension of our family story. It began with small steps: Roberto attending one therapy session at my request, my father accepting an invitation to tour Rodriguez Strategic's offices. Old wounds couldn't be erased overnight, but the brothers began the slow work of building a new relationship based on who they were now rather than who they had been. The culmination of this year of transformation came on Thanksgiving, precisely 1 year after I had carried catering trays in the rain and encountered Roberto. We gathered at my parents' home the first time our complete family had been together in nearly a decade. The differences from previous family gatherings were striking. My father, having sold his luxury car and embraced a more modest lifestyle, seemed less burdened by the need to project success. My mother, who had returned to full-time tutoring to contribute to their financial recovery, displayed a quiet confidence I'd never seen before. Adrian arrived with Carmen and something entirely new: humility. And Roberto, once the forbidden name in our household, sat at my father's right hand, their conversation occasionally tense, but fundamentally respectful. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room for coffee, my father cleared his throat. "I'd like to say something," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "This past year has been difficult. We lost a lot: money, security, pride." He paused, gathering himself. "But we gained something more valuable: honesty, understanding, a chance to repair what was broken." He looked directly at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Luna, I owe you the biggest apology, not just for the recent past but for a lifetime of making you feel less valued, less important. I was wrong, and I am more proud of you than I can possibly express." The words I'd waited a lifetime to hear washed over me like cleansing rain. They couldn't erase the past, but they created space for a different future. Later that evening, as guests prepared to leave, Roberto pulled me aside. "Do you remember what you told me that night at the diner?" he asked. "That I didn't want charity?" I nodded, smiling at the memory of my fierce pride despite being soaked and exhausted. "I knew then you'd be extraordinary," he said. "Not because you're my niece, or because you have natural talent, though you do, but because you understand that true success comes from within, not from what's handed to you." A month later, Rodriguez Strategic launched a mentorship program for underprivileged students interested in marketing careers. As the program coordinator, I found myself guiding a nervous young intern through her first professional project. "I don't belong here," she confessed during our initial meeting. "Everyone else seems so confident, so prepared." I felt exactly the same way, I told her, remembering my own insecurities. "But belonging isn't about starting with all the answers. It's about being willing to ask the questions and do the work." Watching her progress over the following weeks, I recognized my own journey reflected in her growing confidence. The cycle of mentorship had come full circle, transforming me from the one who needed guidance to the one who could provide it. This, perhaps, is the deepest lesson I've learned: through everything, our greatest wounds can become our greatest gifts to others if we're willing to transform them through honesty and growth. The unequal treatment that caused me so much pain gave me unique insight into supporting others who feel overlooked or undervalued. Life will never be perfectly fair. Some people will always have advantages, others don't, whether from family connections, financial resources, or simple luck. The question isn't whether inequality exists, but how we respond to it. Do we allow resentment to consume us? Do we perpetuate the patterns that harmed us? Or do we forge our own path, building something meaningful from whatever foundation we're given? I still work at the grocery store on occasional weekends, not because I need the money, but because it grounds me in gratitude for how far I've come. Sometimes the most difficult paths lead to the most meaningful destinations. My journey certainly did. Have you ever felt like the underdog in your own family? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of overcoming family challenges. Remember, sometimes the people who've been given the least develop the strength to achieve the most. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it brings some comfort if you're still finding your way through similar struggles.